Hello and welcome to Water Stories, the podcast. I'm Eve Barro, and this podcast is a production of BioBAT Art Space. As we embark on each episode, we invite you to immerse yourself in exciting discussions that illuminate the vitality of water, echoing the themes explored by the artists featured in our Brooklyn exhibition on show until June 2025. Enjoy! Today we are speaking with Naoe Suzuki. Naoe is a Japanese-American visual artist whose work explores the theme of water and the environment. For a few years now, she's been conducting a project called Flow, which is a community engagement and participatory project about water based on collecting stories about participants' personal relationship with water as a way to collectively explore concepts of kinship, reciprocity, and interconnectedness. Naoe, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. To start off, I was wondering if you could unpack the Flow project a little bit for us.
Sure, I'd love to. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I am joining you today from Waltham, Massachusetts, located on the ancestral and traditional land of Massachusetts, where the land has been inhabited and cared for by the Massachusetts tribe for thousands of years. So the project Flow is designed to be a participatory installation with storytelling as a core component. And as you say, it's also about reciprocity. Each participant types or writes their stories about water, and in exchange, they take one of the original sheets from the installation as an exchange. So it's also about swapping stories. And I would love to start with how I came to create this project, if I can. So that question was something that I was asking myself more than a decade ago. I started working on the theme of water in my work in 2011. And this question came to me after a few years of working on that theme. What is my relationship with water? And my initial thought was from a more broader perspective, not very personal, thinking more about our relationships as humans. And I thought the humans, and not all humans, but a species in general, have a dependent relationship with water, and we are dominant. We try to control, contain, manipulate, and consume. It's almost like an abusive relationship, I thought. And imagine that we are a partner with water. We're not a great partner for them. And that was clear to me. If water wants to leave us, who can blame water? Yet at the same time, we are water. 60 to 75% of our bodies are made up of water. We came from water. The amniotic fluid that protects fetus is also made up of 98% of water. And we depend on water for our survival. Without it, we wouldn't survive 3 days. And water is vital for all living forms, not just for humans. So why can't we treat water with more respect, love, and care? In the winter of 2015, I began typing this question on tea-stained Japanese papers using a manual typewriter. As I typed, I meditated on that question. And I began adding some drawings on each sheet using blue mineral pigment. And each time I typed the question, that was an opportunity for me to think deep about my relationship with water differently. And I remember one day looking at the snow outside from my studio and thought about this endless cycle of water's journey for over 4 billion years and how magical that is. And it became a really lovely practice for me. So eventually I wanted to ask other people the same question and also extend this practice of taking time to meditate on our relationships with water. So the question naturally became, what is your relationship with water? And I also felt that the use of the word to water instead of with water also reflected our perceptions of human dominance over nature. So I use the word with in my question purposely, but I guess it's not grammatically correct, at least back then. So early on in this project, people kept correcting me, correcting my question and switching to instead of with. And I had to insist that no, I want to use with as if we are partners or companions with water.
I'm just curious, when you reframed your question and you explained that it was intentional, what was people's reaction initially? Did that lead to them rethinking maybe even their answers?
I hope so, but their initial reaction, because I speak English as a second language, I'm originally from Japan. I'm used to having people correct my English all the time, and that's their tendency. Oh no, you're wrong. You're using the word wrongly, incorrectly. Then I said, no, think about this. Then they'll say, ah. So that was a bit of a revelation maybe for some people. But anyway, so I spent some time thinking about how I could introduce the concept of reciprocity in this work, because I wanted to offer mechanics of reciprocity to draw attention to what kind of relationships we ought to have with water. And I came up with an idea of exchanging our work with people's stories. But then I had to think about the mechanics of it. How can I make this work? My first installation was consisted with over 100 sheets of 8 inches by 5 inches Japanese paper on the wall, each sheet bearing the same question: what is your relationship with water? And again, papers were stained with tea first, and my drawings were added in blue pigment on these papers. Then I typed the question on each sheet. So in the installation, every single sheet had the color of blue with that same question. And I set up a manual typewriter by the installation, and I invited people to respond to the question using a typewriter. And I gave them tea-stained papers, but without any blue pigment, to type their responses. Once they finished, they were instructed to swap with any one of the sheets that had blue pigment from the installation. And this is important. This is one of the mechanics. So in the first installation, participants replaced my question with their stories, and they took home my artwork. And visually, the installation lost the color of blue as more people came and participated, because the papers they used didn't have any blue pigment. So as more stories took places in the installation, the color of blue was leaving. So that's the basic mechanics. And for the second installation and all other following installations, I retype people's stories to include in the installation. So in other words, I do not put their original sheet in the installation. I keep them. So that means I create everything anew from scratch for each installation, because I end up exchanging them with new stories. So the process of collecting stories about water, I think, brings light to the fact that there are so many facets with water. And because of that, there's so many different stories.
That's fascinating. Also, how you described the importance of almost rehearsing this exchange and the movement that involves. It started with you taking the time to think about this question and writing it down, and then participants take the time to type it, and it's almost meditative. And I love that there's this collective component to it, because maybe sometimes we might think of meditation as a deeply personal and intimate practice, but then it's so interesting to think about what happens when it becomes something collective, when we reflect together, when we exchange things. You also talked of this mechanics of reciprocity. So I'm curious to hear more about this collaborative aspect of your project and how it shapes the dynamics of this exploration of water that this project enacts.
Yeah, I also think that this project is becoming a creative archive of sort, collecting stories, collecting our shifting relationships with water as the impacts of climate change accelerate and change our relationship with water and also the environment dramatically over time. And I ask people to include their names and the location where they live or they associate with. And I think it's important to see different relationships people form with their waters depending on where they live. And on the personal water connections, I've seen that people tend to choose stories that resonate with them naturally in personal ways. A swimmer friend of mine picked a story written by another swimmer about pleasure and joy of swimming. Someone wrote about a near drowning experience, and another person who had experienced a near drowning picked that story to swap with. And it was really interesting to me because this happened 3 times at least. So it's always interesting for me to see what people choose to swap. And on the more intimate theme of personal connections, there are stories about giving birth, what water means to them in very emotional ways. And memories of water from childhood appear quite often, and usually happy memories so far. Some people wrote love letters to water, and it was quite touching. And my installation now consists of many different stories. And I include some sheets with the original question, what is your relationship with water, to help the viewers understand what all these stories are about. And I've been also developing visual ways to connect people to their local waterways recently. For example, when I was in Oregon last year, I made the shape of the installation based on the shape of Salmon River and its estuary. For my own community, Waltham, Massachusetts, I created the installation loosely based on the shape of meandering Charles River that runs through our town. And perhaps this might bring the viewers feel a bit closer to their local waterways. And it certainly delights them once they find out this connection. So it's been fun for me to see the reactions of people too.
Mm. I love how you described how this process connects people with each other and also with water, because you mentioned that maybe people's answer would resonate with someone else's experience, and so they would exchange their story. When you mentioned maybe people that had near drowning experiences, and something that you mentioned that makes me smile is also the love letters to water, which it really is about kinship and about connecting. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about these concepts of kinship and reciprocity within your work.
Yeah, sure. And before I do that, I just remember some people wrote about how water was their first lover, but they don't treat her nicely. That was interesting. And then another person wrote something lovely about water, giving him pleasure, joy, all this wonderful thing. And then in the end, he wrote, I owe you. So I just remember those 2 stories. So to answer your question about intertwined theme of reciprocity and kinship, instead of transactional, I want this act of exchange to be perceived as reciprocal. And I spend a lot of time preparing the papers, first staining with tea and splashing with blue pigment. Then I cut papers, and then I flatten them before I could even begin typing. So it's a labor, and I hope that translates as care and love. And I also want to create something visually beautiful. And when I create an installation, I don't know how it will look in the end. Each installation is different. I start putting one sheet at a time, trying to find visual connections with the color of blue, whether it's a line or splashes that I am seeing and I'm connecting. So to me, it's like a puzzle. And I connect these blue lines of color to form a dynamic rhythm, the visual dynamic rhythm in the installations. So what I'm offering to people is obviously created by hand. It's artwork, it's labor, And often people don't believe that they can actually take an original piece of art from the installation, because that usually doesn't happen. Some people don't even want to take it and happy to just contribute their stories. And others, once they understand the mechanics of it, they're eager to contribute and happy that they get to take one home. And again, these things don't usually happen. And I don't consider this as a giveaway, because I'm asking people to take just as many efforts to think of their relationships with water and write about it. I hope they get that, and many people do, I think, because I think many people respond with as much reciprocity they can offer to this. And like I said, that's an unusual relationship between the artist and the audience, because the system also defies capitalism, which I think it's a big part of the causes for the environmental and ecological degradation. I believe humans ought to have more reciprocity with water and the environment instead of keep extracting, polluting, and consuming. And we also need to replenish what we take and nurture the health of our water, just like we need to take care of our own bodies. And many indigenous people view water as an extension of their families. Water is a family member. Jose Gualinga, one of my participants who came from Sarayac village in Ecuador, wrote that water is a person, a woman and a man. And what if we all view water as a person? What kind of world would we have? So our relationship with water and nature must be reciprocal and with great kinship, like taking care of our own families. And for me, the concept of reciprocity is very important, but I think the viewers can still get a lot out of it by reading, just reading many stories without participating and writing their own stories. And I hope it generates the sense of kinship with water, but also with other people too. Strangers whose stories may resonate with you, so that's the one that you swap with yours and take home with you. And I hope that people cherish what they take home and live with it in their homes. And I know some people do. And that may remind them that we are all connected through water. And also, just like water, people's stories flow too.
That's very beautiful. It's really inspiring how you describe how during the process during which you prepare the paper that's going to receive people's stories, you put a lot of care and love in what you do, and you know that the participants will put as much care and love in what they do. And it's really interesting how you mentioned maybe it's an unusual relationship with an artist and the art that people engage with. And you mentioned how people maybe would be surprised to be able to take some home, even though, as you said, they put as much care and love in what they did. I'm wondering if you could expand on this exchange of art for stories that happens and how that influences the sort of process of storytelling that goes around water in your work.
Knowing that their stories will be retyped and presented in the future installations and might end up in someone's home, I think that may make people think even more deeper about what they want to write, because their stories will be presented again. So my participant stories become a part of this project flow forever, and they also become my collaborators because I use their stories again and again. And I also noticed that people spend a long time reading every single story almost, because they need to choose one story to swap with their own. So this mechanic naturally invites people to spend long time and to read other people's stories carefully. And they can also write in any languages. It doesn't have to be English. So these stories are becoming a collective voice for water, I think. And almost a decade ago, when I started this project, I had to explain why I was doing this, why water. But these days, I no longer need to explain it. People know. And just within a decade, so much has changed. And I don't need to explain why we need to protect water and so on.
Why do you think there's been this, maybe not shift, but progression in terms of how much people think about water? Because you just explained you don't feel like you have to explain anymore. People just know that it's important to talk about it. So what do you think happened?
In the United States, we still see and we still keep hearing about pollution in the waterways. We have a place called Cancer Alleys, which is really offensive name. We have so much problems with waterways and also air in that sense too. And I think people are becoming a lot more aware. It's not that people didn't know, but they know that we really need to have actions to change this direction, this course. So as climate change accelerate more and more, we're going to see more extreme weather. With at least in California, they have this atmospheric rivers, it's called, or rain. And they're having floods now where they really didn't have much water in the past. Our relationships with water are changing quite a bit. And it's going to change even faster coming decades in the future. So that's one thing I think. It's been really interesting for me to discover from all these stories that I've been collecting that women relate to bodily fluid more than men do. And I would say so far, any stories relating to bodily fluid have been written by women. And people who grew up near the oceans or large bodies of water, they call water their home. As water has so many facets and offers so many varieties of experiences with it, there's just such a wide range of stories. And I've been also trying to categorize these stories. It's not easy to do, but I can give you some samples, like water as joy, pleasure, beauty, tranquility, home, and childhood. Water's power for healing, purifying, cleansing, and rejuvenating. Then there's water as survival, resources, call for protection, appreciation, and gratitude for water. And there are water's destructive powers, of course, floods and fears of drowning, inequality, access to water, scarcity and drought. So it's endless, just endless. And there's just so many great stories. And I would say they're all relatable, as we all share one thing in common, that is that we need water.
Now I'm very curious to hear more about these stories. I know that you mentioned a few testimonies that you had. There's one that really stayed with me. I think it's someone that wrote, "I owe you." I think that's a really powerful statement to make, because you've been doing this project since 2015, if I'm correct. So it's been many years. So I'm wondering if, I know there's many stories, and as you mentioned, there's so many ways to relate to water, even though they're all relatable. So I'm wondering if there are some stories or participants that particularly stayed with you in a special way.
Sure. And I love to read stories, and because I really do think that people's stories are the most powerful element in this project. And sometimes I see my role as a custodian now that I have hundreds and hundreds of these stories. So I'll read some stories here. I'll share with you. Water makes me float, which gives me a sense of liberation. It also flushes out impurities, which allows me a fresh start. Naoko from Tokyo, Japan. Water is the space where my mind is most quiet. Oana, Palo Alto, California. Water is home, warm like my grandmother's chocolate caliente. Unexpected, like my cousin grabbing my foot under the water. Happy, like the moments I was given. Water is mi mami, papi, abuela, titi, tata. Water is hogar, Zorelli, Puerto Rico. I love to swim. I love to simply sit by the ocean and embrace its power and beauty. I gain so much strength from bodies of water. It sustains my mind, soul, and body. Cart, North Adams, Massachusetts. I take water for granted. It sustains me, is my everything. When I have felt like a shell lost, my mind in the mud, thought I could die, water has saved me, saturated me, told me I am real, that fullness is possible, whole. What is the source? Water, that permeates everything, is everywhere. Yet I forget to thank you for life, for being my allies, my possibility. To drink water is to be alive. To be surrounded by water is to feel magic. To know your water is hope. Charlotte, December 9th, 2017. I grew up on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, and I swam in the water until my lips turned blue. I find my environmental identity in water. Joanne Chittagong, Delaware. I was born liquid. I suppose we all are. The Quran states, everything alive is from water. Water is life. I was born liquid. We all are. I was born on the edge of a desert, near the largest, shallowest, warmest body of water in the world, the Persian Gulf, on the coast of Arabia. Now I live on the edge of this lake, majestic views across the water. Pekombak, the place, lake, between Abenaki and Iroquois, between Vermont and New York, between the Green and Adirondacks, morning mist over the waters, snowy landscape, so far from the place where the desert meets the warmest sea. No matter, I was born liquid, we all are. Warm waters, dry land, cool waters, wetlands. Water is life. Mohammed A. Chakai, Burlington, Vermont. My water broke at home naturally. Then you were born. I named you Kai after the sea. Water is a mother's tears of joy. Franny P. Brookaby, Maine. I have drowned before. Water created a stillness to me that is beyond still. I am brought back to that moment now, even 12 years later, of stillness and mortified peace. Jessica, Ashland, Massachusetts, November 5th, 2019. Water has been the best teacher in my life. It has taught me patience, persistence, resilience, and balance. It has shown me how to love, how to hold myself in times of strife, and how to accept the things I cannot control. It has shown me how to find the right flow in my own life. And when I feel lost, it is always there for me to return to and find balance once again. Jake Simondet, Cascade Head, Oregon. I live in the forest along a small river. The water I drink comes from 200 feet underground. I check the river first in the morning and numerous times during the day in hopes of sighting the many different animals that travel and rely on it. I strive to protect it. Robert, Yachat River Valley, Oregon. I am a gardener. Water is my partner. Together, we plant and nourish seedlings under the sun and fill the garden with abundance. Without water, there is no garden. Without water, there is no me. Cindy Feldstein, Grafton, Massachusetts. And last September in 2023, I had an opportunity to present Flow at the Nature Positive Hub event during the UN General Assembly and the Climate Week in New York City. So there I met many people from all around the world. So the following stories are some samples from what I collected from the Nature Positive Hub event in New York. When my son was 9 years old, he asked me why water is so expensive in our place, when in fact it is free from nature. I didn't have an answer, but I think I have a good answer now. Water is life, and that we need to protect it and ensure that we will provide all access to all. The process is it's expensive, and we need funding for it. The ask should be, how can we make it more cost efficient? Water is precious, so let's conserve and protect its sources. Maria Victoria Tan, Philippines. I am from a small island surrounded by water, and it represents so much life. It means everything to us, Amanda, Trinidad and Tobago. The water law is not used until it dries up. Message from the village of Sarayaku, Kausak, Sacha, Living Forest, Sarayaku, Ecuador, Mireya Gualinga T. Translated from Spanish. My friend talked to me about how he climbed trees when he was a child. He's in his 20s. He lives in Northeast Kenya. There are no trees anymore. Water has disappeared, and with it, his image of his childhood. We talked and talked, and we are now creating opportunities for children to harvest water from air as nature does, so they can have their children climb trees. David Cole, Northeast Kenya. And I'll end with this one. Imagine a world without water. Imagine the air you breathe. Imagine the forest you once camped in at school when you were little. Deep in the forest you hiked. Laughed with friends is no longer there for you to enjoy. It is now a story you told your kids, but not something they can enjoy, like how you once you enjoyed it. A story, but soulless. Remember, you're privileged to enjoy nature, but how about the next generation? This is my story. I hope my kid can tell the same stories to theirs. Hope it will. It can happen. Al Latif, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
I have goosebumps.
Amazing, I know.
Yeah, I think that will stay with me for a really long time.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about this statement that you make when talking about this work, that water is a connector. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. But I know that after hearing all these stories, I really can feel it, how it's a connector. But I'm still curious to hear how you would articulate it.
Everybody has something to say about water, something to share from their experiences, because after all, no one can say, I have nothing to do with water. And it was just simple as that. And as you say, you can feel it, you can see it from all these stories that I just read. And this is also from another participant, Caroline from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And she wrote, water is a connector. The same water in Boston cycles again to London, to Sydney, to Chile. When we stand in water, we stand next to each other. And it's so true, isn't it? Water doesn't see divisions or borders. And last fall, I had an opportunity to share flow in my town, and I collaborated with the Waltham Land Trust, where I'm also a trail steward. And we offer river walks with a group of people. And the talk was led by the executive director of the Waltham Land Trust, and she shared historical and also ecological information about Charles River and its surrounding areas. And after the walk, the group came to the gallery where the installation was, And they read and then wrote their stories and then participated in the project. So it was a really great collaboration. I also collaborated with the teacher and her third grade students from Waltham Dual Language School at the same time. And I asked the teacher to work with her students to create one-page artist books about how we must protect oceans and marine life. And students made fabulous artist books. So I presented the students' work alongside my installation. And it was a great opportunity to bring local residents together. And especially for those people who usually don't visit art galleries. So parents came to see their kids' work. Many people did river walks with the Waltham Land Trust, and many others walked into the gallery because they saw people typing, working on the typewriter. So it was a great experience bringing people together around the theme of water, and especially our local waterways. So when I started this project, it began with my curiosity to know what other people were thinking about water. And in a world where we seem to notice or seem to focus more on divisions rather than commonalities among us, I believe the water could be a binding force to bring us together and see the world in a more intricately connected way through water, and see ourselves as a part of a whole ecosystem. In my project Flow, each story may be a tiny splash, but collectively they become a big wave. We realize that each one of us has a story to tell and holds a splash of water that is quite powerful. And I hope that this realization becomes a deep transformative experience for people. And that experience translates to a greater care for our water and also for each other.
That's really inspiring, Naoe. That the whole conversation just made me think about so many things. I love how it started with your own curiosity of wanting to know more about how people connect with water. And maybe I'll finish with this one question, which will close the full circle. What is your relationship with water?
Yeah, there are so many, right? We don't just have one, there's so many. I grew up in Japan, Chiba Prefecture in Japan, but not near the oceans or rivers. So I have a very little experiences or memories of living with bodies of water in my childhood. But my name, Naoe, there's a character that means a wide river. My father told me that he imagined somebody like an estuary, welcoming everybody with open-mindedness and open heart. So in that way, I see myself as an extension of a river, especially an estuary. And when I was at the Sitka Center for Arts and Ecology in Oregon for residency in March of 2023, I did many cold plunges in Salmon River estuary. And I felt as if myself was expanding and dissolving at the same time in that water. It was a feeling of being one with water, and it was really magical. It was a quite magical experience. And my first introduction to open water swim was at the Blue Mountain Center. It's a residency in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. Swimming in Eagle Lake had a great impact on me, and I would say changed my life. Now I'm an open water swimmer. I swim in Walden Pond. And when I was at the Blue Mountain Center, that was 2005. And I had a just great time with swimming in water, swimming in the lake. But it was not until September of 2011 when I was there again and swimming in the cold water. And that's when I truly experienced healing power of water. I was swimming in the lake every day, even when the temperature was dropping to the 30s at night. And last year, I met a very talented writer, Zane Jock Hadar, at the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology in Oregon. He was also a resident there. And we did a cold plunge together several times. And for my project Flow, he wrote about his near drowning experience. In it, he wrote about the water's language. Though he couldn't understand it, he felt the ocean wanted to tell him something. And I felt the same from swimming in a cold lake. So there's something about the cold water. Zhang also wrote, quote, I felt the movement of the freezing water as an energy, smooth, muscular, unspoolings of luminous color. These arms lifted me. It was peaceful and reassuring. I was in the heart of another consciousness. Water is alive. Even in my terror, it held me, quote. So I think there's something to say about water's energy and even consciousness. We experience water's language physically, emotionally, visually, and energetically. And we may not understand its language fully, but water is always telling us something. And it's up to us to really pay attention and listen to it.
Thank you, Naoe. That was such a fascinating conversation. I feel really grateful for having spent this time with you today.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all of our other episodes online on our platforms, as well as in our listening room in our exhibition space in Brooklyn, New York. Bye!